Welcome back, my dear listeners. Before we begin today's story, please show some love by subscribing to the channel and liking the video. Now then, let us begin. Can I ask you what you are doing, sir? Said the man to my left, just outside of my car window. Yes, you can, I answered. I ask away, that's not quite what I meant, the voice said. I want to know what you are doing. Of course I'd noticed and was fully aware the man asking was wearing a city police officer's uniform. I was not so drunk I could not recognize that fact. I was, by this point, feeling a pretty good buzz. The reason for my flippant response was that right now, I simply did not give a fuck about much of anything, especially stupid questions no matter who was asking. I'm sitting here enjoying watching the moonlight reflect off the lake while sipping on my single-barrel select whiskey. It is a calming sight. I answered. Now I do not like being pretentious, but I happen to enjoy the flavor of this particular whiskey. I spent the extra money to buy the stuff and I intend to enjoy it. And if I may add, it is a little better than the blended variety offered. At least this time. And something about moonlight is kinda calming. Sir, are you drunk? The voice asked. Almost, I answered. I hope to be there before long. In fact, I hope to kill some brain cells tonight. I'd like to obliterate a few million of the suckers that tell me I love the bitch I am married to. I'd at least like to get to the point I can handle getting rid of her without too much remorse. Okay, we can get to that in a minute, the voice said. Do you realize that operating a motor vehicle while intoxicated is a crime? Yes, sir, I do. I answered. But I'd like to point out I am not operating a motor vehicle. I am merely sitting in one drinking and getting intoxicated. This vehicle has been rigged to not operate or at least move if the driver is inebriated. The driver has to enter a 4-digit PIN number plus blow into this device. I pointed out the straw above the ignition switch. Any alcohol content above 3/4 of the legal limit renders the vehicle inoperable. I am certainly incapable of operating this vehicle. The voice pointed out the interior light was on, as was the radio or at least the sound system. Yep, that all works. I said. I want to see well enough to not spill when I pour my whiskey. I could listen to music if I wanted right now, I just want a little background noise. It's cool enough to not need the AC. I'd also like to point out that while the engine may turn on automatically occasionally to recharge the battery, the car cannot be put into gear and driven. I added. So, would you care to explain why you are sitting out here in a city park, drinking? The voice offered. I looked at him closely. Well, sorry, I offered. I needed a place to sit and collect my thoughts. Home is just not conducive to that endeavor at the present time. I wondered how he'd react to my changed manner of speech. You do not need to call me sir. Officer will suffice, or you can call me by my name, Gary, he said. May I see your driver's license? I handed it to him and he passed it to his partner. I'm sure he had already run the license plate number so he knew I owned it. Maybe he was just checking who was using the car. I almost laughed. I could understand some of the politically correct bullshit society was throwing at us, but cops offering their first names in a nonviolent encounter? This guy seemed unflappable. Well, instead of calling you off is sir, 3 syllables, I figured to cut that short and call you sir. I said. He looked at me closely and then grinned. You aren't that drunk, are you? He asked. He could tell I was just being a bit of a smartass. Oh, I'm every bit that drunk. I answered. I'm just not that stupid and can maintain. At least for now. I really don't give a shit if I get too drunk to cope. I was aware of the cop's partner stepping back up to return my license. They obviously had no intention to leave, but had not ordered me to step out of the car either. I wondered about that. They stood there hunched over while they observed me, looking uncomfortable. Both refused my offers for a drink or to sit in my car where they could relax. Their sergeant arrived and conferred with them. I guessed later on they had quickly established my identity when the first officer came back, walked around the car and sat down in the passenger seat. How about we talk a bit, Mr. Jacobs? I liked the young man. I told him the last Mr. Jacobs I knew was my father. My name was John. He smiled and nodded. Then he asked if I had somebody he needed to call. I shook my head and said not unless it was illegal for me to continue my drinking, and then he could call my lawyer. Drinking alcohol is legal in the park until 2 a.m., he said. Then I'll sit here until then or am ready to leave, and I'll either call an Uber or my daughter to come get me. I'll need to talk to her anyway. By the way, why did you decide to sit with me? I got special permission. I'm not sure why. My sergeant told me to sit with you and talk, he offered. Why? What do you know about me? I asked. Not much. This began as a simple man drinking in a car in the park call. Once we identified you, my directive was to sit and engage, so here I am. I really have no idea what that means. My sergeant said have a single drink if I think the situation warrants. He'll sign off on it. That alone gets me thinking there is far more to the story. But I'm still not going to have a beer nor any of that whiskey. Do you have any soda or water? The young cop said. This is single-barrel whiskey. It is almost sacrilege to dilute it. I exclaimed with a grin. But there might be a soda you'd like in the cooler behind your seat. I like something caffeinated every now and then, so I keep some stocked. He reached back to open the built-in refrigerator unit. What kind of car is this? It looks like a regular little hybrid from the outside. But everything in it is high-tech? This is no ordinary car, he asked. Who are you? I ignored the young cop's obvious confusion and changed the subject by asking, are you married? He shook his head. Well, I won't be for much longer. Have you ever thought about marriage, or rather the sanctity of marriage? Fidelity versus infidelity? Well, yeah. Gary offered hesitantly. I'd expect my wife to not screw around, and I sure as hell would not. I had a girlfriend that thought since we weren't married she could still have sex with whoever she wanted. We aren't together anymore, not once I caught her screwing a guy in our apartment. I asked him what he did. I almost did enough to get kicked off the force. I pushed my service weapon into his balls from behind and offered to blow them to kingdom come. He was screwing her from behind when I got home. If I'd known they were recording their screwing, I still might have punched him in the balls, but I'd never have pulled my weapon. I laughed and offered my fist for a bump. He grinned back. Of course he begged and cried and almost shit himself, and then later tried to file a complaint. He was taken aside and told he'd have a hard time if he pursued anything, and he might not even be able to walk down the street without having to show ID every block or two. And if he spit on the sidewalk he'd be arrested. He got the message and left town. I still got a letter of reprimand, of course. That was a total gift, and only because a senior officer had been in a similar situation a few months before and they covered for him. Well, that is a better story than I have. I confessed. I'd have loved to caught the bastard while he was fucking my wife. I might have pulled that trigger though. I'd certainly have nailed his balls. Even if the bastard is half again as big as me and a dozen years younger. Gary looked at me. Okay, I take it your wife is cheating and you know who it is. I nodded. The kid was perceptive. You didn't catch them in act? I shook my head. My wife Donna gave me the dumb line, we need to talk. She didn't even preface it by saying honey. I got no more respect than Rodney Dangerfield. I said, I got home from a long day at work and there was my wife and sister-in-law waiting with a couple small suitcases packed. I walked in the door and got ambushed. Damn! Gary exclaimed. Oh, what happened? I get told I am a worthless bastard. I said as I took a sip of my whiskey. Well, not in those exact words. What the wife says is she found somebody more exciting, more in tune with her needs than I have been. Doris, her sister, is sitting there smirking at me listening. I ask her what she is talking about and she says she found a real man, one that puts her needs above his own, and makes her feel like a real woman. I said. Her sister is nodding like one of those little bobble-head dogs you used to see in the back window of a car. Then the bitch, the sister-in-law I mean, says, he has plenty of money to support her in the way she deserves. So no arguing about it and no talk of divorce. You better get on board and let her have her fun without any bullshit. She went on to tell me the guy was man enough to handle both of them sexually and rock their boats. So apparently both women are sluts for this guy. Now that hurt. Not the she was cheating part. I hadn't even fully processed that part. It was that I did not fill her needs and make her feel like a woman. Strangely, that was my first thought. Plus I could not or did not support her. I have to admit too was confused with it all. Donna never complained about our sex life before, so I know I am adequate in that department and I treat her well, but the support her lifestyle part was plainly wrong. You think I altered this car to keep myself from getting a DUI? I built this thing because my brother-in-law was a chronic drunk and I was trying to protect his ass. Do my part as a member of the extended family. He'd have to enter the pin and blow into the analyzer before he could drive home after drinking. I always suspected the reason he drank so much was probably because of his bitch of a wife. He was a nice guy and stayed with her because of his kids even if they were mainly grown. The idiot could not get the car to run one night and accepted a ride from one of his drunk friends and both got killed. I took the car back. "Let's get back to your wife, Mr. Jacobs," the young cop said, patiently. I told him to call me John. Okay, John. So tell me about the rest of your encounter with your wife." I grinned. "You are recording this, aren't you? I still can't figure why you are sitting here with me. Do you have a degree in psychology or something? Is this one of those new age, woke interventions?" I asked as I took a sip. "Not that I care. I'm gonna sit here and drink until you arrest me or I need to pee." "Oh, I get it. You wait until I step out and arrest me for either public intoxication or urinating in public." Gary shook his head. "Nope, neither of those things are more than a minor ticket. One of my bosses made the decision I was to sit here with you, and that is what I intend to do. My degree was in engineering. I went to school under an ROTC program and served my 4 in the Army after college. After I was discharged, I needed a job and the police force was hiring. So 2 years in, here I am." "Engineering, huh?" I said. "Well, maybe later I'll show you how this car is set up. You might enjoy the tour. Anyway, back to my story. The wife, Donna, tells me I am a worthless shit. Not her exact words, but the same meaning. Her sister is agreeing. They picked up their little cases and walked out the door laughing. My wife said she'd be home Sunday afternoon or evening and we would discuss it. Fat chance I'll be there for that. I muttered. I have a daughter who just graduated college who I need to call. I'm a little afraid to, though. She's at that vulnerable age. Trying to start a career and maybe a social life while living on her own for the first time. How do I tell her that her mother is a cheating slut? Worse. What if she knew already and was afraid to tell me? Even worse than that, what if she knew and condoned my wife's cheating? I couldn't take that betrayal. I began to shake. I almost lost it. "Hey, Guy," Gary said abruptly to break me out of it. "Guy mean John, Mr. Jacobs." He paused to regroup. "Let's approach this one step at a time. You have not talked to your daughter, correct?" I nodded and then shook my head, confused about which way to answer. "Tell me about her." Gary said that I relaxed a bit. "I love my daughter. She came along only a year after the wife and I had been married. We got married while both of us were still in college. The wife said no more kids, so that was it, one kid no matter what I wanted. I know what you are thinking, but yes, my daughter is mine. She even resembles me, or rather other females on my side of the family. She is not as ugly as me, thank God." Gary laughed along, which made me feel better. As she is smart as a whip and decided to study computers instead of engineering even though she has the aptitude. "Maybe you ought to call her now," Gary suggested. I balked and shook my head. He shrugged, but I could tell he was not going to let that go. "Later. Maybe." I conceded, not happy about the idea. I don't want to leave my car here and I'll need a ride when I do. I need to figure that out. I'm just not ready to go. That is part of what I've been thinking about. I'm making plans about how I want to go forward. If you keep drinking that whiskey, you aren't going to remember any of those plans anyway. Gary offered. Sure, I will. I said. I have a voice-operated recorder going. I've been making notes. Sorry, I should have led with that to tell you our conversation is recorded automatically. I just assumed your body cam was on. I expect to have anything I say recorded. So do you know who your wife is seeing? Gary asked. I nodded my head. About that time he received a call on his radio. He stepped away from my car. After a few moments he returned. Mr. Jacobs, what is your job with eSyncrobotics? He asked. I shrugged and told him I was an engineer. Gary smiled. More than that, a very senior engineer, right? I nodded. This just got more involved than sit and engage. My captain said you were the man who developed some of their cutting-edge prosthetics. He was just on the line. He said you were responsible for his daughter walking again. You developed a prototype for limb function. They help existing limbs to function normally. That answers the question of why I am sitting here talking to you. He asked me personally for an update. I shrugged. He obviously has an interest in you. Please, sir, Mr. Jacobs. Don't fuck this up for me. I could tell he was supposed to keep part of what he'd said to himself. I wondered how Eddie knew I'd been contacted by his officers. I suspected he'd flagged my name, that he'd be notified immediately about anything that concerned me. That was not exactly legal in my mind, but it was nice he was looking out for me. I'd known Eddie since junior high. His teenage daughter had been injured in a boating accident 2 years before and lost the use of her right leg. He was happy to let me use his daughter as a test subject for one of my prototypes, and now his daughter was on her feet and walking. Eddie and I had stayed close, so I was happy to help. I'd like to take you home, sir, Gary said. I refused adamantly. How about I take you to a hotel? You sleep off your drunk and then approach the day tomorrow with a fresh perspective. Seriously? You expect me to look at the world tomorrow with anything better than I do today? I snapped. No. I said a fresh perspective. That means a clear head. Gary explained. Make decisions rationally and not clouded by alcohol. I said I liked the alcohol and was not ready to go anywhere yet. He shrugged. He tried to distract me a bit by asking about the prosthetics I was developing. I told him that was only one of our divisions. We had several projects ongoing. We were also working on features to enable self-driving cars. I could see him visibly interested in some of the technical aspects. He asked about some of the other projects we're developing. We started a line of voice-operated robotics to enhance the lives of paraplegics. You know, give them a little autonomy in their daily lives. Voice-controlled motorized wheelchairs, for instance. Some of our devices would do more. We were even working on robotic arms that would pick up things and even help the user eat. We were working on one that would wipe the guy's ass. We had a little setback there when one of our testers got all excited and shouted, "Well, slap my ass and fuck me raw." I paused to see how closely Gary was listening. He stared at me for a second and burst out laughing. I could tell he also had a sense of humor like mine. Tell me why you wanted to be cop, I asked. You seem to have the technical aptitude and the right credentials. Why didn't you apply to eSyncrobotics? I did. They weren't hiring. I got a letter saying they'd keep my resume on file. Gary said. I knew that was a brush-off and my resume wound up in the round file. And I needed a decent paying job locally. My mom needed financial help and my sister is in college. It is what it is. I was not drunk enough to overlook this kid's potential. Send me your resume to me directly and come over to visit me in a few days. I have a few obvious personal issues to work out first, but I'll see what I can do. That is if you're still interested in that type career. He stuttered a thank you, then took a deep breath and got back to the task at hand. He was not going to let himself get sidetracked nor possibly bribed. How did you find out the name of the guy your wife is seeing? He asked. I followed my wife and her sister to the Marriott. Nobody pays attention to a little hybrid sedan like this. I watched them as they met the guy in the lobby. That was all it took. The guy embraced and kissed both my soon-to-be ex-wife and my sister-in-law. Gary looked at me suspiciously. He did not state the obvious that I had to know the individual, so I did. Yep, I know the scumbag. Sumamui Yasuhoru. I'm curious if he deliberately set out to cuckold me or if he is just playing games, but he is certainly not the well-heeled rich guy who can provide my wife a better life she thinks he is. I'm guessing you make a pretty decent living, Mr. Jacobs, John. Gary said. I mean, if you are a senior engineer after all. Well, I assume you are fairly senior, judging from your age and the way you talk about the work. I wonder why your wife would think she needs more money. Or is that just something she said to bother you? You're curious if Donna's just a horny bitch out looking for a big cock, or if she is a money-grubbing bitch thinking about trading up? I said. Probably a little of both. We have, or rather had, a fairly active sex life. Couple times a week. I'm only 45 and not slowing down in that department too much. At least that is what I think. My wife might argue the point. But she seemed to be happy with sex a couple times or more a week. I make sure she enjoys it. Either of us would start things and we seemed compatible. I think she's just getting antsy and talking to her bitch of a sister has probably put ideas in her head. My sister-in-law is one of those compulsive individuals. She'll go gambling and be ahead a few $100. You know, hit a little jackpot. Next thing you know, she has lost it all back and heading to the ATM for more money. She'd say she hit once, so it is bound to happen again. By the end of the night, she's shit-faced drunk and broke. She has a decent job that should be enough to live on, but she is always broke and barely able to pay her bills even though her kids are grown and out of the house. My wife seems to bail her out constantly, which has been a bone of contention. I think she slips her sister some money often. In fact, I am sure of it. I generally try to keep quiet about it. After my brother-in-law died, Doris started seeing different men. I stayed out of that discussion too. I think the money is a bigger part of the issue with my wife. I don't bring home enough for her. She works as a school administrator, so we have a double income. We live well, have a modest but very nice home, and I paid for my daughter's college education so she could avoid student loans. We go out to eat at least once a week to a nice restaurant. We travel a couple of times a year and she gets to buy the occasional piece of jewelry, especially when we go on cruises. But she wants more. Fancier cars, even though ours are only a couple years old. She got pissed when I bought this car back from my sister-in-law in return for one of our bailouts. She said a simple hybrid is beneath our station, even though this vehicle has been adapted to be far from simple. She drives a small sporty coupe but wants more. She claims I should go in and demand a raise. I know I could get one, but she'd just spend the extra or give it to her sister and we'd be right back where we are. I did not add my brother had a nicer house, or at least bigger one than mine, but also had more kids. I'd told Donna years ago we did not need a bigger house with more useless unfilled bedrooms. She never budged on the no more kids front. I don't want to be an ass, but it seems like your wife might be unhappy you aren't pushing for a raise. She seems to think you should demand it even if you think your lifestyle is good. She thinks all you have to do is ask and you refuse. Gary offered. Well, part of that is my brother is my boss. I said. Gary looked at me in confusion. Yeah, Bob is the CEO and general manager. Thing is, we draw the same income, which my wife also knows. She just thinks we are both selling ourselves short. I did not want to reveal the rest of the story. Not then, and not to a man I did not know well who had heard more about my private life than he should. Bob and I not only worked for eSync, we owned it, or rather our trust owned the controlling interest. We set our income level to be comfortable but not excessive. My older brother Bob was also trained as an engineer but liked the business side and got an MBA, so when he graduated, he started a small firm building computerized control units for various electronics. We'd used money from our inheritance, which was all locked away in a trust. The trust had paid for both our college educations. Of course, Bob hired me even before I'd graduated. The company had paid me while I went back to school for an advanced degree. I'd been married at the time with a baby, so my wife welcomed the money. We just never bothered to let it be known how the company's infrastructure was formulated. Our families just assumed we held senior positions because we had been with the company since its inception. We hired special talent to make it run, although for years now, our human resources hired most of the workers. The trust protected the company, but our individual assets were all subject to community property laws. That was part of what I was thinking about when Gary and his partner had tapped on my window earlier. "So your wife thinks you are too soft to get with your brother and demand to be paid what you are worth?" Gary surmised. I nodded. He did not come out and say it or ask, but I could tell he wondered if I was a wimp. Maybe I was in my wife's eyes. But I was happy with my job and my current lifestyle. We could live even better if she did not squander our money on her sister. "So have you made any decisions so far?" he asked. I told him only that I would be getting a divorce. I was not about to accept the disrespect. 24 years of marriage be damned. "I think you need to have a talk with your daughter. You may be afraid of her reaction, but you need to hear it," he offered. I nodded reluctantly. Then he suggested he drive me home, and when I cringed, he said, "Well, your wife is not going to be there. But I can see where you might be reluctant. Stay there. You know, be seen as the rejected husband waiting for his wife to come home." I raised my middle finger. He shrugged as he smiled, knowing he was getting a reaction. Were it me, I'd be packing up my wife's shit and trying to establish my territory. But if your situation turns out like one of my fellow officers, your wife is gonna just move right back in. I'd at least get some of my personal stuff secured. Change the combination on the safe if you have one. Grab up important paperwork. Just no driving around tonight. I've been thinking about that, I admitted. I just didn't want to take the risk of getting angry and start smashing up the place. Or maybe burn the place down. I fantasized about that part. The house is paid for, and I don't think it is a crime if I don't file for insurance. Gary shook his head. Getting drunk and staying in a hotel is certainly cheaper than letting your anger get ahead of common sense and lashing out. You probably would not be arrested for arson, but your wife could still sue you for destroying her stuff even if she doesn't actually file charges for vandalism. Plus, she owns half of all of it. Not worth the risk. He stopped to frown. Even finding my girlfriend cheating on me was not reason for me to kick her out. Not according to the law. Because she was living there already and it was considered her home, she got to stay. We have some stupid-ass laws about evicting people. I asked him how he handled it. She got to stay in the apartment, but that didn't mean I had to stay with her. So I moved all my stuff out, and I mean all my stuff. The furniture was mine, so when I got finished, all that was left was her clothes hanging in the closet, and what had been in the dresser was left folded neatly on the floor. Her toiletries were still in the bathroom, and her computer and all her books and stuff were on the floor. I left the food in the fridge because she bought some of it, but not a cup or dish to eat it off of or a pot to cook it in. My buddies helped, so they were all witnesses to nothing being destroyed or messed up in any way. I had to laugh. It was that or cry when I thought about how that part of my life was over. My marriage was toast. I was simply not going to let Donna treat me that way. When Gary once again suggested I call my daughter, I agreed. First, I had him drive me to a drugstore to buy a toothbrush and then to a hotel. I stipulated it not be the Marriott. Once I checked in, I called my daughter. Gary called one of his fellow officers to pick him up, and after we exchanged phone numbers, he left. "Daddy, why are you in a hotel?" my daughter, June, asked immediately. "Did something happen between you and Mom?" I told her I would prefer to talk to her in person if she was available. Hell yeah, I'm available. I went out to dinner with my friends, but I'm always available for you. I'll be there as soon as I can. After I hung up, I realized I'd forgot to tell her not to call her mother before we talked, but then decided I did not care if she did. "What's going on?" June asked as soon as I opened the door to my hotel room. She frowned at my half-inebriated state. "You being drunk means Mom did something. I'm guessing whatever she did was both stupid and hurtful. She isn't stupid enough to try to kick you out. You'd have dug your heels in. She left you, didn't she? She is off with Aunt Doris." I asked her how she gathered that. I drove by the house but did not stop. Aunt Doris's car is in the driveway but over to one side in front of your part of the garage. I could not tell if Mom's car was there. June said, "Oh shit. Did they go off together to party or worse?" June asked the last part, stepping close to see my reaction. I nodded. "Damn," she exclaimed and grabbed me in a hug and squeezed me as she cried. "I'm so sorry, Daddy." I could not hold it back and began to sob. Despite my anger and the feeling of hurt my wife had left me, I knew my little girl was on my side. I loved her, but I can't put up with this. 24 years down the drain. I lamented. "Not down the drain. Just a new beginning, Daddy. You have me," June proclaimed as we hugged. I was happy she did not immediately protest and say I needed to forgive. Finally, I had to ask, "Did you know any of this? Any advanced warning?" She shook her head and then hesitated before continuing. "Well, I suspected something was up. She and Aunt Doris have been spending a lot of time together. Surely you noticed that?" June offered. I agreed. She even stayed over at her sister's house overnight on occasion. The light bulb came on. June continued, "Well, Doris has been doing a lot of partying. And by that I mean going out to bars, dancing and whatnot. She didn't say it outright, but I'm sure she has been sleeping around. She'd see some guy and comment on his but being cute. That kind of thing. Mom said she sort of wished she could do that. Then she'd quickly add something like, 'But I'm married.' And at times she'd complain that you could make more money. All you had to do was go ask for a raise." June blushed. "I don't like to say it this way, but Mom said several times, if your dad would grow some bigger balls, he could go demand to be paid what he is worth. He can't even stand up to his own brother, for Christ's sake." I shrugged and said we had enough money to live well if Donna would not waste it. "Oh, I know. I've watched her waste money. Especially after you would not let me. You gave me an allowance the whole time I was in school. I mean, even after paying all my bills. You told me to consider that my pay for being a student and getting good grades. I had to live within that amount or do without. I think you deliberately limited how much I got, so I had to learn to budget." June said. She broke off talking as she looked in the mini bar. "I can't drink that rotgut straight. I need to mix it. Do you want to pay the high cost of this minibar, or do I walk down and use the soda machine down the hall? I need a drink while you tell me what happened." The thought made me laugh. Even now she was looking at the economical way. She was my daughter. For one thing, this is not rotgut. It is high-dollar single-barrel whiskey. It cost me over $50 a bottle. But save the walk. We'll spend the money. Half of it is coming out of your mother's share anyway when we settle our property." That statement set June back. "So this is not something you are willing to forget and forgive? More than an argument about money?" June said. I told her it was much more and laid it all out. I gave her a detailed account of my time from when I came home to her showing up, including what I observed her mother and aunt do in the lobby of the Marriott. "A cop sat with you in your car and then drove you here?" she asked, impressed. I nodded. "He's a nice guy," I said. "Smarto. He'll be successful at whatever he does. He gave me some advice. Like not go home and burn the place to the ground or throw all your mother's crap out on the front lawn for the neighbors to see. Although I am not about to hide a bit of any of this from anybody." She made her decision. I made mine. As far as I am concerned, I'll let everybody know what a cheating bitch she is. She might even like the advertisement she's on the menu and available. She might be deluded enough to think she can trade up like she said. Or maybe she is trying to push some agenda to get me to accept her new decision to do what she wants. By that I mean she has to know she cannot share the same guy with her sister. Not in the long run. That whole idea is just stupid. It was her spouting off. You sat and thought all this out while sitting in your car and drinking? June asked, slightly amused. I'm not as stupid as everybody thinks. I said, I can think through a situation. Your mother did not just suddenly get hit by some impulse to be a slut. She and your aunt have been planning this. This has to have been brewing for some time. June nodded as she listened. And what bothered me earlier was how much she might have told you. And if you on board. That got a reaction. June stared at me, her mouth open. That turned to a glare and then softened, tears formed. You can't believe I would be part of any plan to screw you over, Daddy. I shook my head. I knew for sure she had no inkling of her mother's intentions. I just had all kinds of thoughts tonight as I sat drinking. How it came about, what really happened, who knew? I said. My thoughts were all over the map. Well, I can tell you this. June declared. As she might be my mother, but that is not going to stop me from telling her what a dumb bitch I think she is. She asked me what I planned to do now in the short term. I told her what Gary had said about how he handled his girlfriend's cheating. He is not an expert, but I have to applaud how he handled the situation. I said. He was decisive and handled it directly but kept his cool. I hope to be as cool. But I can tell you this, there is no way back. I'm just not wired to forgive this. This is not some one-time drunk mistake that can be smoothed over with counseling. This was a deliberate decision to destroy me. To rub my nose in it. Your mother might try to tell me it was just sex even. Or she was just trying to get my attention. Well, she messed up if she did. June said. You were always tough on me. Not that I couldn't get a lot of stuff out of you. But I could tell when I pushed the line. Your lower lip got this little quiver when you got mad. And you kind of pulled your shoulders back when your decision was final. I knew then it was game over. I guess this is not the time to discuss you helping me convince Uncle Bob to give me a job at eSync? June asked with a grin. I knew she'd been applying around and had a few offers, but all of them were outstate. Now I gotta stay close to home to support you. I laughed but felt immensely better about things. I wanted her to be her own person and do what was best for her, so I never pushed her to work for Bob and me. Of course I'd love to have her come to work for the family business. Now was not the time for the big reveal. We'll work that out, honey, was all I said. June and I sat and talked for a few hours. She was too drunk to drive after a few drinks, so we sent down to the lobby for a complimentary toothbrush. She slept in the other queen-size bed. I heard her get up a couple times to go to the bathroom. I woke to sounds of the shower running. June emerged fully dressed, her hair damp. I gotta go home to change clothes, then I'm going to the house. You take a shower, check out and meet me there. We need to get started on handling things, she ordered. No breakfast first, boss? I asked. She grinned at my sarcasm and sternly told me to get my butt up, showered and home to change as well, and then we'd talk about breakfast. I really did not want to go home by myself. I figured I might just change my mind and dump some of Donna's crap into the front yard as a public statement and let her move it back on her own. I took my time, and 2 hours later I drove up to my house to find June's car parked in the driveway. A pickup truck I'd never seen before sat in the street. I walked inside to find June drinking coffee with Gary, the officer from the night before. You told me how Gary, Officer Jensen, was helpful. So I copied his phone number down and gave him a call this morning. June offered as explanation. This won't get you into trouble? I asked the young man. He shrugged and told me he was off duty and this was his day off. He was pretty sure his captain would be on board, and if not, he was thinking about a career change anyway. I went to change clothes. Gary, can I get that car that is blocking MY access to MY garage towed away? I asked. He grinned and told me it was my house, so I called a tow company and had the car removed. The person who left it blocking my garage would have to pay for the tow and $40 a day impound fee when it was claimed. June had called a local storage firm that offered inside climate-controlled storage to reserve a place. It was not long before most my clothing and all of the personal possessions I did not want to risk were safely locked away. I even took a bundle of bedding, towels, and the guest room bed and dresser along with my recliner and the big screen television. I took the everyday dishes but left Donna her good china. I made a point to clean out the liquor cabinet. Petty, but I was not going to leave any of it. We still had time to spare. Daddy, you need to authorize a few things I did for you. Like moving half your money. I used my savings account. You can do all that online, so I just acted as you. I called your investment broker this morning to tell him you are in the process of a messy divorce and asked if you needed to go in person or if he could lock up your account. He said it happened all the time and he could do that. Locking it up is easy. To unlock it takes both you and Mom together or a court order. Is that okay? I nodded. She grinned. Good, because that's what I did. I also canceled your credit cards. I reported them stolen, but I paid off the balance first from your bank account before I did. All your details were on your desk. I know you know better than to leave your book of pins and passwords laying around. I asked what I was going to do for money. Well, I left enough money for you to make an ATM withdrawal for cash for $400. Plus, remember the credit card you gave me for emergencies only while I was in school? Well, you can use it. You and I are on that account. Damn. You are on top of things. Do you have it in for your mother? Gary asked. I thought the man was going to be burned to a crisp with the look June shot him. No. My mom screwed my dad over so she could go slut around. If the situation was reversed and my dad had been the one to go off the reservation, I'd have done the same sort of things to help my mom. I'm trying to be fair. I'm just going to prevent her from screwing him over when she thinks about it. I have no doubt Mom will be trying to pull cash out. I know my aunt. She will be egging my mom on. And once they realize Dad is not going to bend over for them, they will act hard. Before we left the house, my phone rang. It was Donna. Why the hell is my credit card not working? She demanded to know. They said it was reported stolen. You asshole. You are but hurt I found a real man and your little boy ego can't take it. Well, I am standing in front of an ATM machine and I will be hitting everyone I can on my way to the bank to get every nickel I can before they close. You aren't going to stop me from having a good time this weekend. I knew she could only get about $2,000. The rest June had transferred. She'd have enough money to get by for a few weeks if she didn't waste it all partying tonight. I was willing to bet she'd be the one paying for everyone's good time. You made your decision, Donna. I made mine. I said quietly. I am separating our lives every way I can until I talk to a lawyer Monday morning. We are finished. I hung up before she could reply. June and Gary had heard the conversation. I'm hungry. Let's go get something to eat. I knew I could not find an apartment and did not care to stay in a hotel the rest of the weekend. I called my brother and asked if he could put me up for the weekend. Oh, what the fuck did you do? Bob asked. I told him nothing at all. Don't tell me Donna went all brain dead and left your sorry ass or kicked you out for no reason. I told him it was worse than that. Well, the guest room is made up. Bring your butt over here unless you need me to come get you. By the way, I hope you grabbed up all the bottles of that single-barrel whiskey. Don't leave any around for Donna to pour out. I told him every bottle was secured or accounted for. I'd already processed one through my liver and kidneys. Oh well, don't waste any more of it before you get here. I want you sober enough to explain what happened before you get shit-faced. I told him I was taking June out to eat and would be over in a few hours. That's it for part 1, folks. Thanks for hanging out with us here today. To catch more awesome narrations, hit that subscribe button, drop a thumbs up, and comment your favorite part. And hey, don't forget to hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we drop part 2 of today's story.